Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. We have Look Before You Leap, taking a thoughtful approach to career transitions. And we're so excited to have you here today. Thanks so much for coming on. So my name is Lucy Sullivan, and I'll be your host today. And before we begin, I'm just going to cover a quick bit of housekeeping. I know everybody's experienced a lot of webinars and Zooms, so this is probably all review, but we are recording today's webinar. So you'll get a link to the recording, you'll get a link to the slides, and we also do a blog post with a summary of the key points and some Q&A. So you'll have all of that you can review, that you can share as you like. And of course, due to this being a webinar and the size of our audience, everyone's muted and your cameras are off, but we absolutely want to hear from you as we go through the webinar. So anytime you want to ask a question, if things come up during the webinar, if things come up at any point that are related to this, or you have comments as well, we welcome those. You just navigate to the bottom center of your screen and you can pop those questions into the Q&A panel at any time. And we'll break for questions a couple of times during the webinar. We'll get to as many as we can, but we'll also follow up with you. A lot of times we can't get to everything that gets asked, but we'll make sure that we follow up and get answers from our experts there. So, and those answers will be on the blog, so everybody can read them. A lot of time it starts some really good conversation. So I'll give you just a brief introduction of who we are at MRG and who's going to be taking you through the content today. So MRG is a global leader in designing assessments that impact people in profound and meaningful ways. And we have assessments for leadership, motivation, personal development, sales, service. They're insightful, they're research-backed instruments, and they have action-inspiring feedback reports, and they're really designed to foster a deep sense of self-awareness and encourage lasting growth. And we were founded almost 40 years ago, and our assessments have been used by thousands of certified practitioners in more than 100 countries around the world. They're available in many languages. So we have a lot of data on which we draw when we get to share these webinars with you. And we have two presenters today. So you'll have Drew Rand and David Ringwood. So Drew's based in our Portland, Maine office. He's been with MRG as an IO psychologist for just a few years. And in that time, he's made a very, very big impact. He has a breadth of experience in consulting, developing leadership programs, coaching, and really working with leaders around the world. Drew has a lot of curiosity for assessments, and he also plays a very important role in designing and developing and refining the assessments and the products that we do here at MRG. And David is based across the pond in our Dublin office, and he's been with MRG since 2006, and he's our VP of Client Development for Europe, Middle East, and Africa. David has a very extensive consulting background. He's worked with clients around the world in all aspects of the business, teaches certifications, that's consulting, product development, and really just supporting our practitioners with how they use the assessments in practice. David's very passionate about assessment and how it can be used to support people in their professional development and in their lives as well. So I believe that's all I have for introduction. So with that, I'll hand it over and we'll get started. And again, any questions that come up along the way, just put those in the Q&A anytime.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Lucy. Appreciate the introduction. Pleasure to be with you all this morning or this afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. I'm looking forward to the next hour or so, talking about career transitions and the importance of them. We're going to break this into really three sections here today, just talking about career transitions in general, why they are really a critical point in a person's personal and professional journey, the opportunity that it provides in terms of the developmental side of things, and the fact that developmental focus is important during these transitions. And then we're going to be wrapping it up. David's going to be talking about really assessing the opportunities and what's important to be thinking about when you do engage in a career transition. So career transitions, why are they a critical point in a person's and professional journey? And before I start talking about anything, I'm just a little bit curious to hear from folks, based upon, and Lucy's going to get the poll going here, based on personal experience, whether, it's a career transition you were in or what you've observed, How many people do you think engage in career transitions without enough reflection, without sort of enough awareness, or maybe even properly evaluating the opportunities? So I'm curious, I've got a very scientific poll here in terms of not a lot, some, many, and most. So I'm just curious to hear people's responses here in terms of, where people are at in this career transition awareness phase. So, Lucy, do we have the poll going?
We do. Yes, that's
right.
That's people are voting now.
Okay, great. So
sharing their very scientific opinions on our very scientific poll.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I was going to put numbers up here, but I was like, no, I think we'll just leave it the way.
No, it's fun to see people's sort of first reaction to this.
Right.
I'm sure I have a lot of experience observing this. So.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Okay.
All right, we've got just about everyone in. I'll give it another second and then we'll take a look.
Perfect.
All right.
So,
let's share those results.
Okay, so this is so interesting. All right, so we've got very few people, and we've got a bunch in the middle. So some decent spread here, which I think is interesting. But certainly there is based upon the crowd here, enough people who think that people are jumping into things or leaving things without enough thought. So interesting. All right, well, thank you for the poll before I start talking about this. So I move forward. So, we just did that very scientific poll. What about some actual data about this? So two things jumped out at me in terms of setting the stage here. As I was putting this webinar together, I was thinking, well, how long do people stay in jobs? And of course, the Bureau of Labor Statistics has this information. And so I went and grabbed this chart, and two things jump out at me when I looked at this. First of all, people are staying in jobs longer than they were 30 years ago, which is interesting, especially in relation to the fact that, we have so much conversation these days about sort of job hoppers and people jumping around, but these data don't really support that quite as much. And then also, I think just fundamentally, boy, a median of 4 years, that doesn't feel like very long. If somebody's staying in a job for a median of 4 years, that means that they are changing jobs quite a bit over a 30 to 40 year career. Now, obviously, these data look a little bit different when you look at ages, but nevertheless, a median of around 4 years is how long people are staying in jobs, which means job transition happens quite a bit. And then another piece of research just fell into my lap last week, which is just great. So hot off the press, it's some research coming out in the Journal of Applied Psychology about the effects of voluntary job change. So when people voluntary job change, what does it predict? Well, it actually predicts decreased job satisfaction. It predicts decreased vitality or energy, decreased belonging, although not significantly, and it predicts increased work-family conflict. And the kicker, the research revealed that it takes around 5 years for individuals to recoup the same levels of satisfaction that they had from past jobs, even if they left the job due to dissatisfaction. So just really interesting, and again, in terms of what we're talking about here today, boy, grass is greener might be coming into play here. It might be that people are not thinking that their current job is as good as it actually is, or it just supports the fact that people are leaving jobs or engaging in job transition without enough reflection and thought. This research really has some implications for what we're talking about today in terms of career transition. So I think it sets the stage nicely. So I think what can we infer from these studies? Well, you're in a job and you are looking for a new opportunity, and you jump into one without a lot of reflection, right? And you get into that new job and it doesn't feel right? I mean, think about that last study, 5 years to recoup some of that job satisfaction. So the new job doesn't feel right. You start searching for a new job, you want to get out quickly, and then you jump into a new opportunity without a lot of reflection because you just want out. So what does this happen? What does this mean? It leads to this vicious cycle, right? That leads to, I think, missed opportunity for some focused development, so for some focused reflection and making hopefully a better decision. So one of the biggest things that we think that career transition is important for is this developmental focus. How do we use these moments of transition to really increase our awareness, evolve, and make better decisions? So what can they offer, right? What can career transition offer? Well, I think fundamentally they're an opportunity for focused development, right? Thinking about, how did I arrive where I am right now? What has led to where I am right now, and where am I, right? And what do I need moving forward? And really putting some thought and energy into this. Secondly, a fresh start, a new job, a new career is absolutely a chance to rebrand, right? Sometimes we just need to restart, to sort of wipe the slate clean. And I think it's a great opportunity to do that, but doing that with again, a keen eye toward reflecting and thinking about the developmental journey. And so you're wiping the slate clean, not haphazardly, but with a degree of reflection, I think is really important. And then finally, it's an opportunity, I think, to fundamentally make a better decision, right? For better alignment, a more rewarding fit, putting yourself into a position that might be more satisfactory, and hopefully avoiding that piece of research that said it takes 5 years to recoup some job satisfaction. Let's avoid that situation. So 3 things not to do. And I'm going to high level these 3 things, and really the rest of the webinar is going to be focused on how do we try and ensure that these things don't happen? How can we avoid these really common pitfalls, I think, within the career transition space? First, ignoring past experience, right? Just, again, people thinking too much about where they are right now in the future and not reflecting enough. Overlooking the role of motivation. It's really critical. It has a big impact on the decisions that we make, how we feel about things, and it's important to have awareness about it. And then finally, failing to recognize and examine all the unique variables and facets of a career, and not just the one that you're in now or the one that might be coming up, but again, in the past, getting into the nitty-gritty about these facets of jobs and careers. It's not just a job. There's more to it than that. So starting with this first one, ignoring past experience, what are some tips? So when reflecting, what should we be thinking about? So the first one is not getting stuck in the present and the future, right? I think when people start thinking about making a change or making a decision, people get far too focused on the future, right? And what they want, and what they need and what they will get. And they're not bad questions. Absolutely, they're not bad questions. But it's almost like putting the cart before the horse, right? You can't answer those questions accurately or without any sort of depth until you've reflected on how you've gotten to where you are now, right? So I think that's a really important aspect here. I think secondly, people are really, really focused, as I just mentioned, on what they will get in a decision, right? We can be far too optimistic. What are all the pros? What are the things I'm getting? And you don't think about potentially what you're losing, and what the cons are. This happened to me recently. My wife and I, she, after being out of the workforce for a while, has decided to go back into the workforce. We've been talking about it for several months, and it's been all good. There's been no downsides, right? We also have 3 children, and it's fantastic. There's no downsides, and she's been there for about 3 weeks, and we've had like 3.5 catastrophes with babysitters canceling, and we got to get here, and I have to cancel this, and you just so focus on the positive and what you're getting, and don't evaluate things appropriately. So that's really, really important for me. And then finally, not overreacting to the current circumstance. Going back to that research that I just shared, thinking about where you are. Maybe it's not as bad as you think it is, but at least giving it its due credit and thinking about it. Finally, or secondly here, find the moments that really worked and really didn't. So when you are reflecting, don't just say, oh, that was good and that was bad. Think about it, find the moments, go deeper than that, and put specifics to it, right? Find that moment where, in a career or in a job, where something worked really well, and don't stop with the simple answer, right? Don't stop with, well, I had a nice boss. Well, great. Well, what was it that she did? What was it that she didn't do, right? And then you had a bad boss over there. What was it that they did and they didn't do? And what's the delta between the two of them, right? And that can provide a lot of clarity for folks, that I think is really, really important. Okay. Secondly, here, understanding and considering motivation in relation to all of this. So, what is it, right? Well, motivational characteristics, or what is motivation? They're internal drivers that influence and shape what we find attractive, what we find fulfilling, and what we find energizing versus not, right? And motivation is a big part of who we are. And there's some important things, I think, to think about when you're thinking and considering motivation. The first is that it originates in our early years and it evolves over time, right? It starts developing itself very, very early. It absolutely evolves, but it evolves organically and naturally. We can't take an active role in changing our motivation. You can't wake up tomorrow morning and say, I'm going to be more motivated by this. It doesn't really work that way. And so it absolutely does evolve, and it evolves over time based upon our experiences. It's unique to the individual, right? Really, really important here. It's unique to the individual in terms of specificity and in terms of degree. And that's important, right? It's not a black or white thing. I have it or I don't. It's no, you have it. It's the degree to which you do have it or you don't have it. And that's really, really important. It's not about skill or ability, right? Not about skill or ability. It's not what you're good at. It's not what you're bad at. It's not what you can do or what you can't do. We're really not talking about capability here, and that's really important. And then finally, it has a grip on us, right? And if you do not give it enough credit or have enough awareness about it, it can really lead to some decisions or reactions or behaviors that you don't really know where they're coming from or why they're happening. And so motivation has a really, really big influence in terms of where a person is pointed, right? And it makes some behaviors and some decisions easier to come by. They're easier to access, and it makes some behaviors and some decisions more difficult. They're farther away. They're hard to get your hand. They're harder to get there. And motivation has a big role in all of that. So when thinking about motivation and career transition, what can it do for us, right? Well, it can answer a few things. First of all, it can obviously provide awareness, but it all can provide awareness in terms of an individual's expectations and also what the ideal might be, right, in relation to an individual's motivation. So when determining alignment and motivation alignment, some things to be thinking about. What are my expectations? And this is an interesting one because there will be general ones, right? And they will be rather explicit and rather objective. I want a job that's 40 hours a week and I don't have to travel and so on and so forth, right? Those are pretty simple and straightforward expectations. But an individual's motivational profile also creates expectations, right? And these will be less explicit. They're going to be less objective. And if someone doesn't have much motivational awareness, they might not even know that they have these expectations. And if you don't know that you have these expectations, it's going to set yourself up for a situation where there might be misalignment. You don't know why you feel this way, a lot of dissatisfaction. So having knowledge about your own motivation and how it leads to particular expectations and how you see things is really, really important. What do I have energy for, right? And again, people might have sort of intuition about this, and that's great, but they might not know the extent, right? And again, being able to get specific about what you have energy for, what that means for this situation or this environment where I'm going to feel comfortable, I'm going to like doing it, the energy will abound, and that's the space that I really want to be in. having that knowledge, being specific about it, really important. And really helpful in making any sort of decision in relation to career transition. And then finally, where do I need support, right? Where do I not have as much energy, and therefore I need the environment, or I need people around me to support me, right? I don't like the situation nearly as much. I don't like being over here. So if you could step in time and help me out, that would be great, right? And so again, having that knowledge of where the energy might be waning, or the energy for doing something might be really finite, and the decisions around it, or the behaviors to go there are going to be less accessible. And then having the knowledge of where you might need that support, again, is really, really helpful in relation to making the career transition decision. Okay, so I talked about the developmental focus. I've talked about, at least introduced the concept of motivation. Before I hand it over to David here, I just want to talk about the motivation and career report, which is a specific report here that we have at MRG that uses the IDI, which is our motivational assessment. We introduced the career report earlier this year, and it received a lot of positive feedback. People were really enjoying it. They found it really, really helpful. They liked the way it looked. Everything was really positive in terms of the feedback, so much so that we have decided to actually make an update. So we are at MRG, we're in the process right now of refining the motivation and career report, and hopefully making it even more useful for people who would be in career transition, or for people who would be helping people in career transition, or even just want to have some knowledge about motivation and career and how they work together. And so we're really looking toward the back section, the final section, for those of you who know this report, that really focuses on the career. And we are tailoring content even more, adding some additional content that David's going to be referencing here in terms of the supporting conditions. I was just talking about the sort of supporting part of this, and so we're working hard on this update, and hopefully it will be in your hands in the not too distant future. So before I hand it over to David, Lucy, were there any questions as I walk through my part of the webinar?
Yes, a couple great questions, Drew. One, I think we should do for folks who may not be as familiar with the IDI. I know you talked a lot about how important it is to really understand your motivation. Can you do just a broad level what we're talking about, how you get awareness of your motivation? I mean, our answer would be, using the IDI. Can you explain on a high level just what that means, how we're measuring motivation?
Yeah, so you're correct, Lucy. So we would measure motivation. So using the IDI, which is our motivational assessment, and the thing that's really interesting here is the fact that for me, the brilliance of the IDI, or part of the brilliance of the IDI, is we are measuring something that people might not have a lot of awareness about. And also it's not an observable thing. Motivation isn't observable. And therefore, when I was really talking about extent and degrees, the IDI can be really helpful in terms of understanding where am I pointed? Do I have a lot of this motivation? I thought maybe I did, but maybe I don't, or I thought I didn't, and goodness, I have a lot of it in comparison to other people. So the IDI is a really, really helpful tool in terms of not only providing awareness and specificity about the specific motivations, what it means for the individual, but it also provides information in terms of, I would say, degree or extent of, which is really, really helpful for people. It might not be extremely helpful in terms of some aspects of career decision-making, but when you think about motivation in other, I would say, environments or situations, really, really helpful. Any other questions that came up?
That's great, Joe. And in the follow-up, we'll send a sample of this report. Also, probably just a little bit of info on the IDI, just to provide people with info on what we mean by that. Yeah, another question that came in was, what age can you use this assessment or this or this report? I guess, is it applicable to high school, college level people to identify a career path fit?
It certainly is. In fact, I was talking with somebody in the relatively recently about using it for high school students, and you certainly can use it for the younger ages. The only challenge that I have found when using it in the younger ages is they don't have as much life experience to sort of reflect upon. But that's just that's just part of where they're at. But it still can be, I would say, valuable. And I know the individual that I was talking to relatively recently was really in the space of trying to help kids in high school make decisions about college and career trajectory and so on and so forth. And she's actually found it really, really useful. So you certainly can use it in high school and college age kids and it's been and I know that it has been useful for people in that space.
A follow-up question to that, Drew. So
Yeah.
does the assessment use more like work-related terminology that would maybe not resonate with the younger audience, or does it have like a kind of broader terminology in it?
No, definitely the latter. We're not using, I mean, the language I would say is quote unquote professional, but it's not using any language. It's language that would be applicable to anybody. You wouldn't have to have a career to understand the language that we're talking about. We're talking about motivation from really I would say an emotional level, and anybody can understand it. So you don't need to be 35 and in a career to understand it. Definitely not.
For people who are less familiar with the IDI, maybe this is their first time hearing about the tool, Drew, could you just give like an example of like, what's like a motive, not to put you on the spot, but pick one, pick your favorite of the 17. What do we mean by like a motivation? Like what would be an example of one of those?
Sure. I'll just go right off the top. So the first motivation on the IDI is giving. And this is a motivation that really talks about the degree to which somebody is motivated to provide support, to be caring, to be empathetic, to be sensitive to other people's needs, versus not. Somebody who would score lower in giving would not have the same amount of motivation to do that. So they would be more discerning about the limited amount of energy that they would have to be supportive of people, or to be caring, or I only help people on Tuesday afternoons, or whatever it might be. And to go just a step further, I think another thing that's really important here is, because we're talking about motivation and energy, high scores aren't necessarily good and low scores aren't necessarily bad. So that individual who scores high in giving, it's great in some ways, right? It brings them closer to people, so on and so forth. On the downside, it means that they very often probably don't prioritize themselves, right? So they would have a saying no problem, or maybe a saying yes problem, right? Where they would people don't even finish their sentences before they're, offering their help and assistance. But what ends up happening is their own stuff, their own priorities always end up at the bottom of the barrel. For somebody who scores lower in giving, that scenario would be less likely, because they would be able to prioritize potentially what it is they need, or what it is they want a little bit more, or be more discerning about what it means to say yes to somebody in terms of what they are committing to. I could keep talking for many minutes, but I will pause, or I'll stop there.
One more, we have a minute or two before we need to move on to David. Can you talk a little bit more about the link between motivation and expectations? So the asker says, I understand motivation is linked to what gives you energy and what takes a lot of energy out of you, but can you talk about that connection between motivation and expectations?
Yeah, sure. So I'll give an example. So let's just use giving again as an example. That can create expectations for a person in terms of what relationships are supposed to look like, right? So there are several dimensions on the IDI that really talk about what are a person's expectations of relationships. What are relationships a forum for, right? And giving is one of them. Somebody who scores high in giving, they would have an expectation that people want their help, right? That relationships are about potentially reciprocity, giving and helping, and providing support. That's an expectation. It's an expectation about what a relationship is supposed to be, what it's supposed to look like. Somebody who scores lower in giving, their expectation about what a relationship might be, or what it's a forum for, is probably different. It might be less about reciprocity, and it might be about something different. Probably there's an indicator on the IDI somewhere that would tell you what it might be. But all of these dimensions really give you an idea or a sense about what a person thinks this might be for relationships, or how I think through problems, or do I need support, or do I not need support? Again, the list goes on, but hopefully that's a good enough of an example of how this can create expectations about what a person thinks is supposed to unfold in front of them.
Thank you so much. So with that, just for time, I think we'll go ahead and hand things over to David, but a couple of more questions are coming in. They're really great. We'll either follow up with those at the end of the webinar, or we'll certainly follow up with folks afterward as well. Keep an eye out for that blog. But yes, with that, we'll move on to David, but keep them coming. We will continue to get you answers.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Drew. This is extremely interesting, and thank you so much for the questions that are coming in. We got some great questions, and I won't get to it now. If we have time during the remainder of the session, I will get to it, but there was a question about the strong interest inventory, which I've used in combination with the IDI. I'll get into the content first, and Lucy, if we have time at the end, and if not, I think we have a follow-up process anyway, where we address any questions that we haven't gotten to.
Yes, absolutely.
During the recording, so that's great. So we've seen the importance of the motivational dynamic. Each of us are remarkably unique in what motivates us and the extent to which it motivates us. The tool that we use is not an occupational tool. This is not measuring what motivates us just in the context of work. It's describing the individual. It's describing fundamentally what people find emotionally fulfilling and rewarding and satisfying. And it's very important to understand that. It helps us to make better choices. It drives greater self-awareness. It gives us a little bit more lucidity of thought when we are trying to assess the quality and the relevance of the next career opportunity. And what motivates us today, not 20 years ago? Or have we ever stopped and asked the question? So let's look at some of the issues very briefly when it does come to the career transition, bearing in mind that these are very important moments in people's lives. Think about our career. I mean, it's a forum for lots of different things. Careers are a forum for our aspirations. You know, jobs can also be a form of security and financial reward. It can be a forum for a community, a togetherness. It's often part of our identity when people talk about themselves. So to some extent, the stakes are higher when we talk about these transitions. And that's in addition to that new research that drew our attention to, which is really, really helpful. You know, it matters. So let's think about what we can do to get it right. So when we think about career transitions, there are a couple of issues, and there's many others. This is not an exhaustive list, but here's a flavor of some of the topics. It's often easier to know what we don't want, or I want to get the heck out of here, or I know I'm not happy, but I'm not sure what I really want. So anything that helps us to organize our thinking in a very complete and a very objective way about what now in the next iteration of our career or the next stage of our life gravitationally draws us is a very, very helpful thing. It provides that perspective, which otherwise can be quite difficult to get if all you're doing is looking at job advertisements and this attracts me and this attracts me, but I'm not sure why. We have to be careful about the, and I hope this translates well, the beggars can't be choosers type of dynamics. Because there are a finite amount of opportunities out there. There are a subset of those opportunities which are really relevant and exciting and represent a sufficient jump to the next level in seniority or financial reward or whatever currencies you're interested in. And that places us to some extent potentially at a little bit of a disadvantage, particularly if we're not clear about what we're after, that we may just go with what's there. There's a language thing around all of this. Often we have an instinctive thing, but it's less tangible. We're trying to put our finger on it. We're trying to define it. We're trying to crystallize it at some level. And it's not just about the clarity of thought, as important as that is. There is a way of specifying and articulating and verbalizing what's relevant to us, what would constitute a really attractive opportunity and would make that transition worthwhile. And finally, there is a little bit, as we all know, of a psychological disadvantage when we get into the interview and the application process. And at some point, we're kind of putting our dignity on the line. We read the job advertisement. It sounds interesting. That's pretty cool. I'm going to fire my resume in there. And we think about it, am I going to get invited to interview? And if I do, then I'd be thinking, oh, heck, I wanted it, but now I'm not so sure I wanted it. Now I have to prepare and all this kind of stuff. And you have to justify yourself. Even things you've done well and things that you're proud of, you have to prove, you have to demonstrate, you have to compete against the X number of other candidates who are there. And it's easy to fall into that pattern. I think it's not as easy to have the view that, listen, I have my own criteria. There are things that are relevant to me that I want to satisfy myself as I look for the next opportunity. And if you're not clear what they are, if you haven't organized your thinking about them, and if you don't know what to look for, either in the interview process or in any of the kind of vetting processes you put around all of that, people who've worked there before, or people who know who's in the organization, or what's on, Glassdoor or websites or otherwise, it's easy just to fall into that place of thinking this process is all about me trying to prove myself, with no proportionate measure about me trying to assess the relevance and the quality of the opportunity. So these and many other dynamics are particularly important. And if we're grounded in where we are motivationally, if we've borne in mind other factors that can really feed into the perspective that we're trying to get here, it can really make a substantial difference to the clarity of thought that the individual can achieve. So what we're trying to do here is to take an approach that is as specific as possible without it getting lost in any kind of granularity or noise. We want to maintain clarity, not create confusion. So what we found is helpful is to break it down into three main facets when it comes to the career. The first is the broadest, which is the type of environment, the organizational culture, the landscape in which you operate. That really works for me. That aligns well with what is individually rewarding and fulfilling and satisfying. We've all, I suspect, been in environments where there was something that didn't quite fit, or I felt like I was swimming upstream a little bit, or the environment in which I worked, the rules of the game were not really the kind of rules of the game I like to work within. So there's something about that environment. And if it lines up nicely, it becomes effortless. You just fit in naturally. You don't have to invest energy. In fact, quite the opposite. It pays you back. And isn't that a sweet thing to have? There is the role aspect of this, of course. Now, this is the most obvious one. But because it's the most obvious one, people may focus or fixate a little bit on this and forget some of the other factors, the other variables, which are arguably of equal importance. But there will be aspects of the role which in and of themselves will provide you with a great sense of fulfillment that are important to have or to discover or to establish whether these are elements in the role. And if they're not there, at least then you're making an educated choice. At least you know what to expect. And maybe these are aspects that you can achieve in other aspects of your world, not just in work. So for example, some people love creativity and they love exploring and discovery and new ideas. And it may be that the role fulfills that. Or it may be that there's some of that in the role, but maybe I'm asking the wrong things in my work environment. Maybe there's other things in my personal life that I can pursue that might provide that sense of fulfillment or supplement it. And that's not unreasonable. And of course, inevitably, the relational dynamics. That these are factors which, when you think about them, and as you have conversations with people, It's not exhaustive, but if you were to choose and place your bet on 3 kind of core dynamics, these are probably the ones that just keep showing up. We've all been in situations, or I think many people have been in situations where one of these may not have worked. You know, I like the people, but the job is lousy. Or my team is wonderful, but the wider environment, once you get outside of that bubble, there's something about it I don't really feel works for me. Or I hate I like my job, but I hate my boss. Those types of dynamics. So we're trying, insofar as we can, to first of all understand in these key areas what's most relevant, what's most personally fulfilling, what creates most natural, authentic alignment. And similarly, you know, we got to avoid, insofar as we can, the opposite of that. If there's something about the organizational culture or the rules of the game or the way things work around here or the mindsets that people live with, and you're fundamentally pointed in the opposite direction, you've got to ask the question, is this a good decision for me? Maybe I like the role, but I'm saving up a bigger problem here, because as soon as I move on and go further up or go to a different place in the organization, I'm going to bump up against this. And, you know, the same applies for the remaining 2, the role. There may be aspects of the role which, you know, you may be intellectually capable of doing. It's not the issue. The issue is, do you really want to do it? Now, let me be clear about this, be it culture, role, relationships. All of us understand that we don't always get to do everything we want and avoid everything we don't. I've never seen that. If anyone finds it, call me. You'll have a friend for life. So we're being reasonable and realistic about this. It's about getting a close enough fit so that you know that this is going to work for you, and you know what to look for. You know where the flags, the red flags are, the danger signs. You know what indicators might be relevant to look for. And you can make educated choices about, there is an aspect of the role, it's not going to be great, but it's worth it because of these other reasons. One of the things to be a little bit careful about before I move on is what's known as the von Restorff effect. Paraphrased as the isolation effect, which is that we can lose perspective on things really, really quickly. So let's just say, I'll give you an analogy. 9 good things happen to you during the day, or you get 9 compliments during the day, but you get one person who makes that snide remark or who sends that nasty email, and suddenly that's all we can see. And all the other stuff potentially goes away, or the proportion is not represented in how we experience it emotionally. If we are dissatisfied or frustrated by our work or our environment or the relational dynamics in which we sit, and we just want to move on, sometimes that effect can skew our thinking in a big way. We forget really quickly all the other stuff that's really working for us that we may want to preserve and defend and carry with us and use as an objective criteria against which to measure the quality of the opportunity. We may become disproportionately focused on those 1 or 2 areas which kind of hit closer to home emotionally, or that are more of the moment. So it's anything that helps us to bring a sense of completeness, a sense of objectivity, and a sense of proportion around these factors are going to be very, very helpful in all of this. So there is, of course, the psychometric measurement, but there's also the observational measurement, because the motivation does help you to have an objective and empirical sense of how you compare motivationally relative to most other people, which is very hard for any of us to have. It is legitimately difficult for any person to have any objective sense of how they compare motivationally, which is what the assessment measures, when the only thing we can observe about other people are their behaviors. So the psychometric measure brings a great sense of perspective. It is empirical, it is scientific, but also there is the past experience. All of us have lived our own journey, have we not? We've all walked our own path. We've all breathed our own air. No one else knows it, only we. And the way that we have experienced different aspects of organizations, in this case, culture, it can be very helpful to reflect on that in addition to the psychometric measurement. So this observational piece, think about it. I worked in those organizations of that size and of that nature, and there was something about it that I really want, or there were aspects of it that appealed to me. What was it? It's not arbitrary. There were reasons why those fits were there. And similarly, there may be aspects of those organizations and the journey we have traveled through them that, you know what, it never really worked for me. And there are reasons why, and the marriage of the psychometric, the motivational DNA, and the way that we have experienced things can really complete the picture in a very, very helpful way. And it really helps us to inform our thinking as we look forward, as we think ahead. So what we're trying to do in the approach that we adopt is to be very balanced in drawing upon the lessons of the past so that we benefit and so that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, because that experience is hard won. That experience has merit, it has value. We can use that constructively to inform our thinking. And it's important that we take some moment to do all of this. Now, to the earlier poll about people's level of preparation, this is the conversation in many cases we've never had with ourselves. So this gives people a method to help them to organize their thinking, as well as providing objective data to support their thinking. So with the wider organizational culture, we balance the experiential, and these is an example from the psychometric observations. So it specifically defines the aspects of organizational culture and articulates them in certain ways. Now, I think it tacitly gives a sense of expectations to that earlier question that we had, for which I thank you. I think it was a great question because all of us at some level have expectations of the culture. And all of us can be quite different. You know, what motivates me, and there's many, many people on this call, and probably twice as many will listen to the recording. What motivates me is probably not the same as what motivates any of you. That doesn't make me better than you. It doesn't make me worse than you. It makes me different to you. And people can be remarkably unique in the things that are personally fulfilling and rewarding to them. There's no right or wrong with any of this. It's helpful to have an objective sense of what is relevant, what is fulfilling, what provides that sense of energy and personal reward in terms of the landscape. And similarly, the psychometric observations can tell us about aspects of the culture which you can be perhaps more flexible about. It's not a big deal for you. It may be less relevant. You will draw less energy from it. So you can be perhaps less discerning, or it's less a priority. It's less mission critical. We do the same then for the relationships. And I'm not going to go through all three, but there was one aspect of the relational lens that I want to talk about, because when Drew mentioned that we're upgrading the report, I'm going to give you an example of how we're doing this. Now, we're doing this for all three areas: culture, relationships, and role. I'm not going to be too repetitive and giving you examples of all of this, but I am going to use relationships as the forum for an example of the new work that we're doing. So we use the similar approach here. You know what? There's something about relationships. You know those people where you just got on well with them. It was fairly effortless. The chemistry was there. There's something about it. It's not random. There are reasons why people just seem to click. And similarly, there are reasons why people just bump up against each other, or something, as I heard once, grinds your gears. What was it? Have we ever stopped and thought about it? Because again, it's not random. There are specific reasons for any of us. Now, to Drew's point and to the earlier question, it can talk about our expectations of relationships, what relationships are a forum for. What are the rules of the game? What does good look like for any of us, which will be remarkably unique? Some people see relationships, as Drew pointed out, as a forum for reciprocity, the give and take, the shoulder to shoulder, the mutual support. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. They walk in the room with that expectation, and other people don't. Others see relationships as a forum for recognition and status and acknowledgement. Other people are looking for greater degrees of attention and visibility. I don't care what you think about me. That's different. I'd like you to notice me. They love being in the limelight. People value different things. People are very different in that regard. And as we think about this, we reflect back on the journey we've traveled in different relationships, and what was it about them that really worked? And when they didn't, what was it about that? And similarly, the psychometric observations can help in all of that, helping to define where gravity will naturally pull us, where authenticity naturally sits. Because the one thing we really want to avoid insofar as we can in this world that we all live in is the avoidance of trying to be someone we are not. It really, really doesn't work. We can do it all day, but it's not authentic and it's not sustainable. If you're trying to be someone you're not, how long is that going to last? You're going to have to find energy every single day to continue to drive down that road. Ask yourself the question, be it in the broader context of the culture, be it in the relational dynamics, or be it in the specifics of the role. Is that a choice I really want to make? Because at least now it becomes more of a choice. So we have the things that are a natural fit. We have the things from a relational point of view are less of a fit. And we add something which will be in the new report, which we found to be very relevant, and it really resonated with people. Because I think it's easy enough to define what's more relevant, what's less relevant or important, and so on. But there is something about supporting conditions. If I work, for example, with people, so this is in the lens of relationships, I score low on belonging. Belonging is satisfaction from feeling connected with people. People who are high on belonging really enjoy not just being physically present, but having a very strong sense of togetherness and a sense of community and feeling that they are a part of something. They are very sensitive to feeling excluded or feeling isolated. They value a strong element of interpersonal closeness, where low belonging people really value interpersonal distance. It's not that they don't like people, they just find it exhausting to be around people all the time, or they certainly may prefer something more selective. Times at which people with which circumstances under which I'm okay with it, I really do enjoy it, but a point up to which enough is enough. Or the threshold. You know, I'm okay for the first 30 minutes. After that, I really need to be by myself. I've had enough. Thank you very much. If you scored low on belonging, a supporting condition may be that I work with people who understand this about me. They leave room for me to participate if I want to, but they don't get the wrong end of the stick if I really want to withdraw a little bit and be by myself. They don't misunderstand me. They don't think it's an attitude failure or any of that. They respect my need to have a certain degree of interpersonal distance. These supporting or complementary conditions in relationships can really make your life easy. And again, as you reflect back on your past experiences, maybe this was one of the dynamics that really made those relationships work. People got you, they understood you, they had insight into you, or you made it easier for people to understand you because we talked openly about things like this, what works for us. The second example is structuring. If you're low, structuring is about being attentive to detail. Some people love it, the precision, the thoroughness, the meticulousness. But people who are low, they don't have that appetite. They like to be more flexible as regards how things to get done. But the supporting condition is that if there are people around me who are willing to take care of the minutiae, to build out the process and take that heavy lifting away from me, it really can grease the wheels when it comes to relationships. And the same is true of the role. It's the same thing about what worked, what didn't work, the psychometric observation of what's more relevant, what's less important, and so on. I think Lucy is probably going to provide sample reports. So in summary, before I hand it back to Lucy, think about the upsides of getting all of this right. And I prefer to focus on the positive thinking as opposed to what happens if you get it all wrong, because there are some real advantages here. The clarity of thought that can be provided in having a greater lucidity about what I'm really after, what is relevant to me, what I should be looking for, against which you can evaluate the quality, the relevance of the opportunity and the potential downsides, that balanced, informed perspective. The language, because now we have a narrative to work to, and that can be important for our own internal narrative, because we can have this conversation with ourselves and we walk in the room with that. And it also makes it easier to access that language when people ask us questions about ourselves, which is a really helpful thing in an interview when you are at a natural psychological disadvantage. It means that it's there. You can tap into it more quickly. It's already been thought through. Very hard to scramble to find the right words when you're under that type of pressure. The conviction, the confidence. We've taken the time to think about this. We've reflected upon the journey we have had. We have empirical measure, norm referenced, based on scientific measurement of what's relevant to us, what's rewarding to us. And we've broken it down in a way that I think makes practical sense. So we walk in the room with a stronger sense of clarity and confidence. And that becomes more of our criteria. We play perhaps less of the beggars can't be chooser type of dynamic. And we are a bit more objective then in trying to assess, is this the right fit for me, either in terms of the role or the way things work in the environment or with the people I'm sitting around the table with. And of course, then easier to know exactly what you're looking for because now you know what you're looking for. Simple as that. Lucy.
Thanks, David. Keep them coming in, even though we're just about out of time. We will, as we said, make sure we get you follow-up answers. But David, I know you did want to answer that question that you peeked at earlier about the strong inventory, and where IDI career fits with that.
Yeah, the strong interest inventory, I've used it in combination with the IDI, and it actually dances very, very nicely. The strong interest inventory uses multiple different methods in the questionnaire to try to evaluate the type of industry, the type of role. But it actually draws upon certain features of the individual, but the recommendations can be very varied. So you can get a person getting a recommendation that you could be working in this industry, in financial services, you could also be working in the sciences. A lot of the characteristics about the role or the criteria that feed into the recommendations are very solidly based. I do like the tool. The IDI will tell you why it is so. It will tell you what is it about the motivational makeup of the individual that makes those specific roles or environments more relevant and a better fit. And I think it helps the person also to discriminate or to discern a bit more closely about the broader environment. So this one gives me a recommendation for a job in financial services. This one, it's a similar type of job, but it's in advanced technology or FMCG. As I think about that cultural dynamic and the type of environment in which I would like to find myself, it helps perhaps me to organize my thinking, but it's a nice combination, and I found it does work very effectively.
Thank you so much. So to make sure that everybody can get to things in their next hour, we will wrap up there, but feel free to throw questions into that box, because we will send answers to everything in our follow-up materials. So look for the blog post that'll come your way, and that'll have those answers. Coming up next month, our next webinar is one of our favorite topics. It's about coaching leaders to go to the next level, and the way the behaviors that you need change as people ascend through the organization. That's a great one. That's also free. If you're certified in the LEA, you can join us for a workshop on LEA culture in mid-November. And then certifications, our next IDI certification actually starts next week. I believe we can still squeeze people into that if you're interested in having the IDI in your toolkit. If that date doesn't work, of course, get in touch. We'll have many more opportunities coming up. If you're already certified in the IDI, we've got personal directions coming in November. That's just 2 sessions, and you'll get the whole personal directions suite. And that brings us right up to the hour. So I will stop babbling, but please go to mrg.com for all of that and more, and get in touch with us with any further questions, anything that comes up for you about this. We are always just so happy to help and share anything we can with you. So thank you so much, David and Drew, for your time today. We appreciate you guys, and we appreciate everyone who joined us for this. We're really so happy to have you here. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.